strange how the places we feel safest can sometimes become the stage for our worst nightmares. For most of us, home is a sanctuary, a place where we can finally let our guard down. But what if the very thing meant to protect us, a simple doorbell camera, ends up capturing moments that make us question just how safe we really are? Tonight, I'm going to share with you 5 true scary stories, all caught on doorbell cameras. These aren't urban legends or campfire tales. These are real events submitted by real people, and the footage exists as chilling proof that sometimes the scariest things happen right outside our front door. Story 1. The Midnight Visitor. It was a quiet Thursday night in late October, the kind of night where the world feels still, and the only sound is the wind rustling through the trees. Emily, a single mother living in a small suburban neighborhood, had just put her daughter to bed. She was scrolling through her phone, half watching a late-night talk show, when her phone buzzed with a notification from her doorbell camera app. At first, she thought it was just a raccoon, or maybe a neighbor's cat. But when she opened the live feed, her heart skipped a beat. Standing on her porch was a man she didn't recognize. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie, and he stood perfectly still, facing the door. He didn't ring the bell or knock. He just stood there, staring at the door, as if he was waiting for something or someone. Emily's first instinct was to check on her daughter, making sure she was still asleep and safe. She quietly locked her bedroom door and called 911, whispering her address and explaining the situation. The man didn't move for what felt like an eternity. He just stood there, occasionally glancing up at the camera, as if he knew he was being watched. The police dispatcher stayed on the line, assuring Emily that officers were on their way. Suddenly, the man stepped closer to the door, so close that his face filled the camera's view. He smiled, a slow, unsettling grin that made Emily's skin crawl. Then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. When the police arrived, they searched the area but found no sign of the man. The footage was reviewed, and the officers told Emily that similar incidents had been reported in nearby neighborhoods. The man was never caught, and to this day, Emily checks her doorbell camera every night before going to bed, haunted by the memory of that midnight visitor. Story 2. The disappearing package for Mark and his wife. Online shopping was a way of life. Living in a busy city, they relied on deliveries for everything from groceries to electronics. Their doorbell camera had caught its fair share of package thieves, but nothing could have prepared them for what happened one rainy afternoon. Mark was at work when he got a notification that a package had been delivered. He checked the camera feed and saw the delivery driver place a box on the porch, snap a photo, and leave. A few minutes later, another notification popped up. This time, the camera showed a woman in a bright yellow raincoat approaching the porch. She looked around nervously, then picked up the package and started to walk away. But as she reached the edge of the porch, she suddenly froze. The camera's motion sensor had triggered a loud chime, and the woman looked directly into the lens. For a moment, she seemed to consider putting the package back. Instead, she did something that still baffles Mark to this day. She set the package down, took a step back, and then vanished. Not walked away, not ran, just vanished, as if she had never been there at all. Mark replayed the footage over and over, trying to make sense of what he'd seen. He even showed it to his friends and family, who all agreed it was one of the strangest things they'd ever witnessed. The package was still there when Mark got home untouched, but the image of the woman in the yellow raincoat, staring into the camera before disappearing, stayed with him. He never saw her again, and the mystery of the disappearing package remains unsolved. Story 3. The Masked Stranger. It was the week before Halloween, and the neighborhood was already decorated with jack-o'-lanterns and fake cobwebs. Sarah and her husband loved the holiday, and they'd gone all out with their decorations. Their doorbell camera was set to record any movement, just in case any mischievous kids decided to play tricks. One night, around 2 a.m., Sarah was woken by a notification on her phone. She groggily opened the app and saw a figure standing on her porch. The person was wearing a white mask, blank, expressionless, almost like a mannequin's face. They were dressed in all black, and they stood perfectly still, facing the door. Sarah watched in horror as the masked stranger slowly raised a gloved hand and waved at the camera. Then, without a word, they turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. The next morning, Sarah found a small handwritten note taped to the door. It read, "Happy Halloween. See you soon." The police were called and the footage was reviewed, but the stranger was never identified. For weeks, Sarah and her husband were on edge, jumping at every sound and checking the camera obsessively. The masked stranger never returned, but the memory of that night still haunts them every Halloween. Story 4. The Silent Watcher for years. The Johnson family had lived in a quiet cul-de-sac, the kind of place where everyone knew each other and nothing much ever happened. Their doorbell camera was more of a precaution than a necessity, a way to keep an eye on the occasional package delivery or neighborhood kid selling cookies. But one night in early spring, that sense of safety was shattered in a way they never expected. It started with a simple notification just after midnight. Mr. Johnson, half asleep, checked his phone and saw a blurry figure standing at the edge of their front yard. The camera's night vision made the person's features hard to make out, but it was clear they weren't moving. At first, he thought it might be a neighbor or someone lost, but as the minutes ticked by, the figure didn't budge. They just stood there, facing the house, hands at their sides. Curiosity turned to unease as the figure remained motionless for nearly 20 minutes. Mrs. Johnson, now awake, joined her husband in watching the live feed. The figure was tall, wearing what looked like a long coat, and their face was obscured by the shadows. Every so often, the person would tilt their head, as if listening for something, but they never approached the door or made any attempt to interact. Finally, Mr. Johnson decided to turn on the porch light, hoping to scare the person off. As soon as the light flicked on, the figure stepped back, almost melting into the darkness. The camera caught a brief glimpse of their face, a pale, gaunt expression, eyes wide and unblinking, before they disappeared behind a tree. The Johnsons called the police, who arrived within minutes and searched the area. They found no one, and there were no footprints in the soft earth near the tree. The officers suggested it might have been a prank, but the Johnsons weren't convinced. Over the next few weeks, the doorbell camera captured fleeting images of the same figure, always at a distance, always watching. Sometimes the person would appear for just a few seconds, other times for nearly an hour, never coming closer, never making a sound. The family became prisoners in their own home, afraid to go outside after dark. They installed extra locks, added more cameras, and even considered moving. Eventually, the sightings stopped as suddenly as they had begun. The Johnsons never found out who the Silent Watcher was or what they wanted, but every time the doorbell camera chimes, a wave of dread washes over them. A reminder that sometimes the scariest threats are the ones that never say a word. Story 5. The uninvited guest Megan had just moved into her first apartment, a small but cozy place on the ground floor of a busy building. She was excited to start this new chapter of her life, and her parents had gifted her a doorbell camera for peace of mind. At first, it seemed unnecessary. Her building had security, and the neighborhood was considered safe. But one night, that sense of security was shattered in a way she never could have imagined. It was a Friday evening, and Megan was home alone, unwinding after a long week. She was watching a movie when her phone buzzed with a doorbell camera notification. Expecting it to be a food delivery, she glanced at the live feed and froze. Standing at her door was a man she didn't recognize. He was older, with graying hair and a weathered face, dressed in a faded jacket and jeans. He didn't knock or ring the bell. Instead, he pressed his face close to the camera, peering inside as if trying to see through the lens. Megan's heart pounded as she watched him reach into his pocket and pull out a set of keys. He tried each one in the lock methodically, as if he'd done it 100 times before. When none of the keys worked, he stepped back and looked directly into the camera, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he began to speak. The audio was muffled, but Megan could make out a few words. "I know you're in there. Let me in." She called the building's security, who arrived within minutes. By the time they got to her door, the man was gone. The footage was turned over to the police, who identified the man as a former tenant who had been evicted months earlier. He'd apparently returned, confused or perhaps angry, trying to get back into what he thought was still his home. For weeks after, Megan jumped at every sound, her sense of safety shattered. She changed her locks, added extra security, and never again ignored a doorbell camera notification. The image of that man's face inches from the lens haunted her dreams for months. Contrast framing, the illusion of safety. What's so unsettling about these stories isn't just the strangers themselves, but the way they shatter the illusion of safety we build around our homes. Doorbell cameras are supposed to protect us, to give us peace of mind. But sometimes they reveal things we'd rather not see, moments that make us question just how secure we really are. Each of these stories is a reminder that danger doesn't always announce itself with a bang. Sometimes it's a silent watcher in the night, a masked stranger waving at the camera, or a former tenant who refuses to let go of the past. Smooth transition. From the familiar to the unknown, these stories show us that the line between safety and fear is thinner than we think. The next time your doorbell camera chimes in the middle of the night, will you have the courage to look? Lumine the shadows, we invite. There's something deeply unsettling about the idea that our most private moments, the ones we spend behind locked doors and drawn curtains, can be observed by someone standing just a few feet away. Doorbell cameras were invented to give us a sense of control, a way to keep the outside world at bay. But as these stories have shown, sometimes the very act of watching invites the unknown to watch us back. It's easy to dismiss these incidents as rare or unlikely, the kind of thing that only happens to other people. But the truth is, every home with a camera is a stage, and every night brings a new cast of characters. Some are harmless, a neighbor dropping off a misdelivered package, a friend stopping by unannounced. Others, though, are the stuff of nightmares, strangers who linger too long, faces that appear and vanish, voices that whisper through the static. The footage from these cameras is often grainy, the audio distorted, but the fear is always real. It's the fear of the unknown, the fear that someone is out there watching and waiting. It's the fear that no matter how many locks we turn or cameras we install, we can never be truly safe. And yet, we keep watching, hoping that the next notification will be nothing more than a passing car or a curious animal. But deep down, we know that sometimes it won't be. Natural flow, the human response. What's fascinating is how people respond to these moments. Some freeze, paralyzed by fear, while others spring into action, calling the police or confronting the intruder. Some try to rationalize what they've seen, convincing themselves it was just a trick of the light or a glitch in the camera. But the footage doesn't lie. It captures the truth, no matter how much we wish it didn't. For Emily, it was the smile of a stranger in the night. For Mark, it was the impossible disappearance of a woman in a yellow raincoat. For Sarah, it was a masked figure who left a note that still sends chills down her spine. For the Johnsons, it was the silent watcher who turned their home into a prison. And for Megan, it was the uninvited guest who reminded her that the past can sometimes come knocking. Contrast framing. The thin line. There's a thin line between curiosity and fear, between vigilance and paranoia. Doorbell cameras walk that line every day, recording the mundane and the menacing alike. They show us the world as it is, unfiltered and unedited, and sometimes that world is far scarier than we'd like to admit. But maybe that's the point. Maybe these stories aren't just warnings, they're reminders. Reminders to trust our instincts, to take precautions, to never ignore that uneasy feeling in the pit of our stomachs. Reminders that the world outside our door is unpredictable, and that sometimes the only thing standing between us and the unknown is a thin pane of glass and a blinking red light. Smooth transition. The stories continue as technology advances. Our ability to watch and be watched will only grow. Doorbell cameras will become smarter, clearer, harder to fool. But so will those who wish to do us harm. The stories you've heard tonight are just a few among thousands, each one a testament to the strange and sometimes terrifying world we live in. So the next time you hear a chime in the dead of night, or see a shadow flicker across your screen, remember these stories. Remember that safety is never guaranteed, and that sometimes the scariest things are the ones we catch on camera. Strong hook. What would you do? Ask yourself, what would you do if you saw a stranger at your door in the middle of the night? Would you confront them, call for help, or hide in the shadows hoping they'd go away? Would you trust your instincts or convince yourself it was nothing? The answers aren't always clear, and that's what makes these stories so powerful. They force us to confront our own fears, to imagine ourselves in the shoes of those who lived through these moments. And maybe, just maybe, they'll make us a little more cautious, a little more aware, the next time we hear that familiar chime.